Welcome to Philadelphia, the birthplace of the United States of America. Both the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were written here. My name is Marie-Lane Germain. I served as the lead organizer of the Women's March on Asheville in 2017, 2019, and again this year. The planning committee members and I welcome you to this online 2020 Women's March on Asheville rally, and we hope that you will enjoy the lineup of speakers and musicians.
In 2017, millions of women and men around the world attended the women's marches because they were outraged, angry, sad, and they knew that this was an opportunity to make a stand. It was the largest single-day protest in American history. Close to 13,000 people attended the Women's March on Asheville, North Carolina.
1 year later, in 2018, more than 250 women were on the ballot at the midterm elections. We saw a wave of female candidates elected at both the national and state levels. A record number of women were elected to Congress, and 117 women won elections across the country. They were flipping seats and taking names. Of them, 42 are women of color, and at least 3 identify as LGBTQ. These candidates represented an evolution for the Women's March, from a one-day event to a movement that had and will have a major influence on elections. The Women's March efforts inspired people to vote and inspired women to run for office.
Almost 4 years later, we see decentralized efforts to elect progressive candidates. I am confident that these efforts will succeed. The past few years have seen incredible growth in women's activism around the country, fueled in part by the marches and the energy that they have created.
The Women's March's influence is long-lasting. Smaller movements were born after the 2017 Women's Marches. Power to the Polls, which registered tens of thousands of voters nationwide. Meanwhile, the Women's March worked with other groups like Indivisible and the Justice Democrats to back progressive candidates and policies around the country. Whether it was the Women's March or something else that directly inspired them, more and more people were just sick and tired of sitting on the sidelines. Some women described the march as the first time they felt hope. Had the Women's March not happened, I'm not sure that people would have felt as empowered. The marches and other movements of the past few years have also made white women more aware of how intersecting racism and sexism impact women of color.
This year, we are really focused on the future. We're having a different kind of march. Unlike in years past, because of COVID, there will be no main stage in Asheville. But those who marched need to channel their energy into other activities, including running for office or participating in grassroots efforts in swing states to elect progressive candidates.
My hand on the freedom plow, wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. Hold on. Well, the only chance that we can stand are the chains of hand in hand. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Got my hand on the freedom plow. Wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on, keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.
Hi, Asheville Women's March. This is Jasmine Beach Ferrara. I am a Buncombe County Commissioner running for re-election in District 2 and Executive Director of the Campaign for Southern Equality. I wish we could be together in person, but I know we're together in spirit. And I want to thank all of you for what you're doing right now to fight for racial justice in our community and also to work together to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is such a critical time as we head into the election, and I want to make sure that all of you are registered to vote, that you are helping friends and family register to vote and make plans to vote safely, whether that's absentee voting, early voting, or election day voting, and also that you're planning to vote up and down the ballot, from local races to judicial to state to federal races. The reason that matters so much is because there's something at stake at every level of government right now, whether that's having a coordinated national response to the COVID-19 pandemic, whether that's expanding Medicaid and funding our public schools, or locally, whether it's expanding early childhood education and affordable housing and investing deeply in the reparations process that is underway. All of it matters because it touches and impacts people's lives. Thank you for what you are doing and what you will do in the next 6 weeks as we prepare for the election. This is a time of tremendous division in our country, and now more than ever, it's important that we double down on hope, on empathy, on love, and on linking arms and working together to create what we know is possible in our community. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you're doing, and I can't wait till we can be together in person again.
Thank you for joining us in this virtual Women's March. I am Brandy, the daughter of Rose, the granddaughter of Evangeline, the great-granddaughter of Eula, and the mother of Elizabeth. When you look at my lineage, I realize I possess rights my foremothers didn't, and there are rights I want to preserve for my daughter. When you look at my presence here today, it is evidence of my growth in reckoning with the term feminism and the movement, the women's movement, which I have not always embraced. And so if you ask me why I'm virtually marching today, I would tell you I march because of Ida B. Wells, Black suffragette who also launched an anti-lynching campaign. Ida B. Wells embodies what it means to be a Black feminist. Our struggle has always been one that is intersectional. We don't get to choose Black issues or women's issues because they are both. So I march against misogyny and against misogynoir. I march because according to the American Association of University Women, it takes a Black woman 19 months to make what a white man makes in 12. I march because 40% of Black women will be the victims of intimate partner violence within their lifetimes. I march because despite being in a wealthy and industrialized nation, Black women are more than 2 times more likely to die in childbirth than their peers. I march because our health and our pain is often underestimated by healthcare workers. I march because 23 trans women have been killed in 2020. And in our hemisphere, the life expectancy of a trans woman is between 30 and 35 years old, younger than my 36. I march for the mothers and sisters and daughters who have had to bury brothers and fathers and sons, as well as mothers, sisters, and daughters who have succumbed to state-sanctioned violence. Arrest the officers who killed Breonna Taylor. I march for the children who were taken away from mothers and held in cages to deter others from coming to our country. I march for the women who have to choose between going to work and making ends meet and staying at home to supervise their children during distance learning, realizing no matter what they choose, they will be demonized for that choice. I march for the mothers whose children are hurt by our education system through over-identification and special education, under-identification as gifted, or pushed out through exclusionary discipline practices. I march for the women who are food insecure yet do not qualify for WIC or food stamps. I march for the mothers facing eviction in this looming eviction crisis. I march for non-respectable women, such as sex workers. Yes, like most of you, I march for voting rights and I march against voter suppression. and I march for a woman's right to choose. But most of all, I march for a right to live. That is, the right to food, clean water, unlike the water in Flint, shelter, and safety that evades so many women in the United States. A scholar whom I greatly admire, Brittany Cooper, said, "It isn't feminism if it doesn't take into account the concerns of all women, especially those in the margins and the most vulnerable." To borrow from Mickey Kendall, I march for the women, the movement for God. I march for Black women, Indigenous women, Latina women, Asian women, Muslim women, poor women, queer women, trans women. Because Sojourner Truth said, "Ain't I a woman?" I march for me, I march for you, I march for my daughter and all the daughters yet to come.
Our country has changed.
From a global pandemic
to the worldwide movement against systemic injustice, racism, and police brutality.
And an environment that is more divided than ever.
Planned Parenthood's commitment to our community hasn't changed.
Planned Parenthood Votes South Atlantic, the political and advocacy arm of Planned Parenthood, is already at work, building on past electoral successes to make a decisive impact in November.
The Planned Parenthood South Atlantic advocacy team is using digital tools like texting, a nationally coordinated marketing campaign to encourage voter registration, requesting absentee ballots, and completing census surveys.
Being counted has never been more important, and if you haven't had a chance to complete yours, go to 2020census.gov today to be counted.
As our country is dealing with the pandemic and the many challenges that presents, our political world has not stood still.
North Carolina continues to be one of the nation's top swing states.
The stakes for the state and the nation have never been higher.
The pandemic has served to highlight, in real time, the serious consequences of limiting preventative and accessible care.
Policies like Medicaid expansion are vital to the future health of our state, and in 2020, it is finally within our reach.
We need elected officials who will make it easier, not harder, for everyone to get access to health care.
We are capable of accomplishing the big changes that fundamentally alter our political reality for the better, but we need your help.
With so much on the line, it will take every eligible voter to show up and support the candidates who support the values of Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood Votes is in a unique position to reach young voters, female voters, and voters of color. They trust Planned Parenthood as an important messenger. We can and we will get out the vote.
Thank you for standing strong.
Voting strong.
Together.
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 Althea Gonzalez, Artistic Director of Women's Song, Asheville's longest-running and largest women's chorus. We sing together for joy, social justice, and community, and we are thrilled to add our choir's voices to this year's women's event with a song chosen especially for the march, I Come From Women. We honor the many generations of women who came before us, brave women of wisdom and dreams who struggled yet kept moving forward. They gave us strength and courage, and they passed the torch to us.
Virginia Woolf said that for most of history, Anonymous was a woman. We honor all those generations of women, known and unknown, who blazed that trail before us.
Hello, I'm Lori Horvitz, and I've been part of the Women's March on Asheville organizational team in 2017 and 2019. In 2017, over 10,000 people gathered in Pack Square for our rally and then marched through downtown Asheville. The collective energy of that day was empowering and hopeful. To know that together we're stronger, that we're not alone in our struggle to maintain the rights we fought so hard for, including the right to vote. Our intersectional movement includes all women, including Black women, Indigenous women, poor women, immigrant women, disabled women, Muslim women, Latinx women, queer and trans women. Together we can build a stronger community and work on dismantling systems of oppression. Together we can inspire, support, and create a more just world for everyone.
I think it's so important for people, especially, queer people and minorities, democratic process so our voice is heard, and we can support people who support us in our humanity.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
I mean, I think that voting is the way that we get things to change. And especially right now, we need a lot of things to change. And so, I mean, the Electoral College is, in my opinion, should be eradicated at this point because it's not, it was built in a time that America looked incredibly different. And it's no longer getting us the results that, honestly, the results that are actually real, as we saw with the last election. And so I think that, I mean, obviously that's not going to change this year. It's a little late for that. But like, I think that in the future, especially the people who are going to be voting for the longest, which is our generation, like in the future, we're going to be the ones who are voting for the next however many years we're going to be alive. We need to be more vocal about how we want our elections to be run, because I think that a lot of people think the Electoral College is stupid, but nobody's going to say so. And so I think that we need to be more vocal about a lot of things. Like, we keep expecting things to change, but unless we say we want change, we're not going to get it.
Yeah. Other people who are voting for the first time, Michaela, you said you're voting for the first time. What does that mean to you?
It's actually really important because my mom this is actually my mom's first time voting as well, because my mom did not believe that voting mattered or was important, but after these 4 years, she was like, Michaela, if you don't vote, we're gonna have a problem. So this is actually a huge thing for not just only me, but my family in general, because we're at a point where politics is actually important in our household and voting is important. And plus this year, it's so hard to vote, and it's going to be one of those times where voting is going to be so misinterpreted and so many people's votes are just going to be forgotten and just destroyed completely. So it feels like it's very important to vote this year, or else no one's voice is going to come out whatsoever.
Yeah. And other people? Bailey, did you say this is your first year voting?
No, this is my second year. The last election was my first time voting, and it was super devastating. So definitely gonna try that again, and hopefully it goes better this time. The one thing that I wanted to say about voting is it's super important not only to look at like our presidential election, but also go down the whole ballot, research on your local levels, because that's where like the real change can really happen and your vote means the most.
Other people? Corey?
Yeah, I was just going to say, especially when you frame it, thinking about voting as a constitutional right that a lot of us in this class like wouldn't have been able to do even just 100 years ago, let alone for some people, like still voter suppression is such a big issue for a lot of minority communities. And the fact that so many people have that right and have the ability to help make change and don't use it is part of why I really advocate for everyone trying to do absolutely everything within their power to make it to the polls or get an absentee ballot and make your voice heard, because there's just that classic statement of, you can't rightfully complain in the same way about things happening if you had an option to say something and didn't use it and didn't make your voice heard with that constitutional right,
Totally. Anybody else? Amanda?
I think voting is how we maintain our rights as well. Like, they weren't written for us, for women, for people of color, for queer representation. We weren't entitled to rights. So we have to show up every time to make sure that we keep the rights that we've already fought for and that we can continue to open rights for other people who aren't represented and expand ours.
Yeah. Jessica? No. Ariel, did you want to say anything?
I agree 100% with what Bailey said and what Corey said, like, especially with the presidential election and stuff. Change definitely starts small, like the whole talk to your family, talk to your friends, get them to understand like certain mindsets and stuff. If you don't change it like within your community, within your town, within your state, then it's not likely going to stay however we're trying to change it. And it's just so important to not focus mainly on the presidential election, but on every aspect of everything you're voting for, because these are your rights and these are aspects that are affecting you and your daily life. These people are here to represent you, not just think of it, because it's the only way America will listen to anything individualistically. It's affecting you personally, especially the lower ballot votes. Because this is
Hi, I'm Rich Mueller. I'm a retired Air Force officer. I'm the husband of a courageous, wonderful, devoted, caring wife of 32 years. I'm the father of two beautiful, brilliant, grown daughters. I've been asked why I march. I march for my wife, for my daughters, for all our friends and family, for the equality of all people. I march because women, even in 2020, don't have the same opportunity and rights as men in the workplace. I march for the right of women to make their own choices about their bodies. I march for the availability of health care and education for all. I march to end poverty, homelessness, and hunger. I march because Black Lives Matter. I march against the rampant proliferation of military-style weapons in our society. I march for better treatment of our veterans, for their mental health care, for their general care, for their housing. I march for LGBT rights. I march because science is real, climate change is real. I march for sane and compassionate treatment of refugees and immigrants coming to our shores. I march for our standing in the world as leaders in human rights and scientific development. I march to end the insanity and the immorality of the last 4 years. I march because our democracy is being threatened like I have not seen it in my 55 years. I march because our votes matter. Everyone's votes matter. We cannot let that be taken away. I march to remind everyone that our greatest weapons are our voices and our votes. We will continue to march. We will continue to speak up. We will vote for what we believe. Thanks. Be safe. Be well. Keep up the good fight. Cause good trouble. And most of all, vote before or on November 3rd. Thanks.
How's everyone? I'm Cat Williams. Like to sing you a little song. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with yeah. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love.
Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Ruby, I'm a freshman in high school, and today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about why youth involvement in politics and activism is so important. So I know that as someone under 18, politics can seem something far away or disconnected from your daily life, but we have to realize that as kids, we actually have a lot of influence on the people around us. Mainly because we're in school, constantly surrounded by people we wouldn't normally be surrounded with, and we also have social media as a platform, which is huge. So I talked to some of my friends on a Zoom about what we can do to be more active in the community, and I'm about to show you that video. Thank you so much for being here, even though it's virtual. I know it's a little bit different, but I hope that you're impressed by some of the artists and the speakers that we have for you today.
Okay, so obviously, since we can't vote, we need other ways to like spread the word and be able to be active, since obviously we have like the responsibility to share our personal ideas of equality and stuff. So what do you guys think are some ways that we can do that?
So this kind of makes me just so popular in school, but anytime we can write about anything, I always like make it political, because then, you know, like the class has to listen. But like,
True.
because like if you post something on your story, people just might like scroll past. So I was like, well, if I write an essay for school, they have to listen to me present. So I like to use school as a way to get my opinions out there.
Totally. I think also, like, obviously, since we're, you know, in school right now, it gives us the ability to be really creative with everything. So I think art is also a really cool way to be political without being, like, forceful or, like, you know, boring about it. What else?
Something cool about my art class is that they give us like political classes there. They explain us how the social media and how we are basically killing the environment. Also, he tells us about the president and things. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also with like our family, I know that a lot of change happens within the community and like, you know, obviously voting for people who are closer locally. But since we can't vote, I think talking to your family and getting educated is like super important.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on a walking, keep on a talking. Gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no deniers turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let no deniers turn me around. Keep on a walking, keep on a talking. Gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on a walking, keep on a talking. Gonna build a brand new world.
My name is Kelsey. On January 21st, 2017, Angela Peoples, a black woman, stood unbothered in a crowd of smiling white women clad in pink. Her hat read, "Stop killing black people." The sign she carries said, "Don't forget, white women voted for Trump." While she sucks on a lollipop and gazes off camera, the women around her stare at their phones and pose for pictures. The picture vividly demonstrates the dissonance between America's mainstream feminists and the civil rights movement. Feminism has historically been white-centered, while civil rights discourse largely pertains to men of color. For modern feminism to survive, it must adapt to include. It must fully embrace intersectionality. While white women obtained the right to vote in 1920, most black women were unable to vote until decades later. White women earn 82 cents for every dollar earned by white men, but black women only earn 65 cents to every dollar. A quarter of Hispanic women lack health insurance, compared to just 13% of white women. Around 72% of trans people murdered in the U.S. are women of color. Nevertheless, modern feminism often fails to acknowledge these disparities, which can lead to the othering and exclusion of women of color. Women from all walks of life showed up to the Women's March in an act of resistance against violence, yet women of color are often left standing alone in their own front line. The Women's March was being criticized as being a product of feminism, predominantly white, able-bodied, and cis-centered. The position of the white feminist movement is clear. All women are expected to be feminist, but not all feminists support women. The Women's March advocated for legislation and policies addressing a breadth of women's issues and demonstrated a cultural shift towards a more inclusive feminism. But that show of intersectional solidarity should not end with a march. It must be continually demonstrated through genuine allyship. This violence we face together is a clear affront to basic human rights. but somehow the violence against black people has been carved out as a separate form. Black women and children are frequently the victims of police violence. Reports suggest that black women are victimized in similar ways as black men. During the Women's March, nearly 2 million people marched in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, and Seattle, and not a single arrest was made. A simple Google search reveals hundreds of unarmed, non-violent Black Lives Matter protesters have been met with SWAT teams in riot gear, armed with tear gas and rubber bullets. Women's March protesters were welcomed by cheerful officers willing to take selfies and march alongside them. More importantly, though, the Women's March exemplifies the privilege to congregate peacefully and without threat of violence. There are few differences between the Women's March and the Black Lives Matter movement, but the state's response to both is vast in comparison. It requires that white women continue to show up to support intersectional movements and use their privilege to amplify these causes. All women are victims of state violence in some form, and truly intersectional feminism should resist all forms of state violence. Privilege, when recognized and properly wielded by allies to support marginalized people, can help women of color to advance their causes in a meaningful way. The Women's March showed the world that 5 million people can rally behind a cause. 5 million women standing in solidarity could change the world.
Greetings, fellow marchers, agitators, activists, and disruptors for change of the Women's March on Asheville. My name is Dr. Thais Ruffin, and I am an 11-year resident of Asheville, North Carolina. It is a pleasure to chat with you for a few to share my desire for our collective. Notice I use the word collective. You know, collective is very important in this movement as we actually advocate and fight for the rights of all women as we pursue equity and justice for all women. Collective hasn't always been at the forefront of women's movements. If we think about the year 2020 and that this is the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, we know that during that movement, it was not as a collective. We know that some were betrayed. Some did not act as allies and co-conspirators for justice for all. You may be able to recount the names such as Ida B. Wells, as Nannie Helen Burroughs, as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, as Mary Church Terrell, as Susan B. Anthony. However, I wonder if you can recount that in this history, there was some betrayal, there was some disenfranchisement, and that some thought that during this movement that it was white women overall. So again, that was not as a collective. So I ask for our movement that we enfranchise and that we center the humanity of all women in our fight for justice and equity for women's rights. May we not think about acquiescing to or yielding to white supremacy in our own movement. Furthermore, I would be remiss as an educator if I did not highlight an issue that I think we need to address in our movement. And that issue deals with the intersectionality of racism and sexism, particularly for Black girls in the educational sphere. Unfortunately, civil rights data shares that out of all subgroups, Black girls are often less protected, receive harsher consequences, seen as less innocent, and are often criminalized in our public education setting. What does this do for Black girls? It erases their childhood. It erases their innocence. So as we think about our own movement and racial educational justice and the inequities involved around racism and sexism, particularly for Black girls, let's lift them up, center them, and let's think about how we can disrupt those inequities and fight for justice on their behalf. So yes, let us agitate, protest, and act for all of us as a collective. Because as Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody's free until all of us free. Thank you. In solidarity.
This is the best of time, and this is the worst of time. Stocks, they are rising as the number in the food lines increase. We, you and I, willing or not, are participants in a movement. a movement that is pulsating. It's in our cities and towns. They are marching, protesting, and even dying. Some are watching from the comfort of their home or the discomfort of a private space. Still others contributing money for a voice, recognition within the structures of power. Many of our citizens breathing heavily under the laws and policies of an oppressed leadership. Citizens rising up, questioning, continuously asking why, marching and asking out of respect for those that came before, wiping away the sweat, blood, and tears of years of voicelessness. The arc, bending toward justice, is bearing the weight of the questions. Questions. Why is there no justice in fair wages? Why is there no justice in housing? Why is there no justice in health care? Why is there no justice in education? Struggling together to remove the logs from our eyes and hearing each other, realizing the barriers to inclusion are movable. I ask that you see me, a single mother, a grandmother of 3 granddaughters, and a proud great-grandmother of a beautiful granddaughter. I'm a veteran, but most of all, I am a participating community member. November 3rd, 2020, I have 1 vote. But I believe that my 1 vote can bring about recognition. I ask you to vote. Vote early. The earlier, the better. The worst of time, the best of time. Come hell or high water, November 3rd, 2020, I'm not going to miss my opportunity to vote.
Way back when they said amen, they meant every wealthy European male. So back then to vote required be white and be rich and be male. They said you can't vote if you've got no property. You can't vote if you're not free. You can't vote if you are a woman, 'cause you've got no stake in democracy. Year by year, people had to ponder what the Declaration must have meant. By all men, clearly it was time for an electoral adjustment. And they won the vote for those who had no property, won the vote for those who've been free, won the vote for women in America. They wrote it down, it was guaranteed. They all said it's my vote, you can't deny it, my
Part of what I'll be sharing with you will be in Spanish. Tu voto para estas elecciones es sumamente importante. Con tu voto tienes el poder de determinar quién te representará local, estatal y nacionalmente. Pero sobre todo tienes el derecho de elegir a alguien que represente tus intereses. Para muchos como yo que no tenemos el derecho de votar, contamos con ustedes para que tomen las decisiones adecuadas. Espero que hagan uso de ese privilegio y recuerden que aunque muchos no podemos votar, estamos aquí y merecemos representación digna, humanitaria y justa. No necesito recordarles que hay niños, mujeres y familias sufriendo las consecuencias de sistemas y representación que no nos califican lo suficiente humano. Si tienen familiares que cumplen o tienen ahora el derecho de votar, o se hicieron ciudadanos o nacieron aquí, infórmense y hagamos que nuestra voz y nuestro voto cuente. Voten como si nuestras vidas dependieran de ello. These elections are incredibly important. Your vote has the power to determine who will represent you, locally, statewide, and nationally. For so many like me who don't have the right to vote, we are counting on you to make the right choices. I hope you make use of that privilege and remember that although many of us can't vote, we're still here and we deserve a humanitarian and just representation. I don't need to remind you that as we sit here today, there are immigrant women and children and families suffering from systems and representation that don't deem us human enough. So go vote as if these lives depend on it. If you have family members who are old enough to vote or have recently obtained that right or were born here, please make sure they get registered. Remember that every vote counts.
Hello, Women's March on Asheville. My name is Galia Paliga, and I am the president of the NC National Organization for Women. I have been involved in the Raleigh Women's Marches since the beginning. Women and allies all over the world moved in defiance in similar directions. As NC Now president, part of my role is to organize and also to keep members informed about what's going on and to document events. And it's been a joy to document the women's marches in North Carolina. There were 13 in 2017, and those are captured on video. The right to assemble is recognized as a human right and protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Not that Trump would know that. Speaking of the Constitution, 2020 is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment that gave some women the right to vote. Too many were prevented from voting for too long. Black women, indigenous women, immigrant women, poor women. Many couldn't vote, and many men of color couldn't vote until 1965. And unfortunately, there's voter suppression again. As we've learned, having the right to vote is not enough. We have many articles on suffrage centennial events over the last year. They began with the She Changed the World kickoff event last September that was at the state capitol in Raleigh, and a coalition of organizations did another event last summer, When Women Gather, Uniting for Positive Change. And that event evolved, like many things due to the pandemic this summer, to be online. And we were able to reach 685 people at least via Zoom and Facebook Live, whereas our in-person event would have reached like 150. Another change that we've seen is the extended George Floyd protests and Black Lives Matter protests became the largest nationwide protests ever. 15 million to 26 million estimated participants. And at our conference, at our state conference on October 9th and 10th, Dr. Valerie Johnson from Shaw University is going to speak about the racial injustice in the justice system for women. And, you know, the changes that resulted from these protests, for example, made a settlement happen after the murder of Breonna Taylor in her home in Kentucky. That would not have happened before these protests. We have a military Me Too movement. My attention this summer has been riveted on the disappearance and murder of Vanessa Guillen. Her disappearance kicked off a military Me Too movement online and protests all over the country. In fact, there were 3 in Raleigh on July 25th. Actual change is coming to the military as a result of this, finally. The military Me Too movement is reaching Fort Bragg and Fayetteville. At our conference, we're also having a panel on changes they need at Fort Bragg and in Fayetteville to handle sex crimes better, correctly. So, moving forward, we are focusing women's power now on the vote. We must make changes in the White House. So the NC Now conference theme is voting our future now. That is what we must do. Go vote. Thanks.
Welcome to the Women's March on Asheville. I'm Jimmy Cochran-Pratt, co-president of the Equal Rights Amendment NC Alliance, a nonpartisan made up of 13 lead organizations, all with the ERA as a focus. I also live in Asheville. Why do we need the ERA? Because all Americans are not equal under the law. 96% of Americans believe that men and women are equal. 80% think equality between the sexes is already guaranteed in the Constitution. It is not. The Equal Rights Amendment is a simple 24-word statement affirming equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It's actually that simple. 70% of Americans poor are women with children. Women make up 2/3 of the minimum wage workers. Women in America are twice as likely to retire in poverty as men. Every day in America, 3 women die at the hands of their intimate partner or spouse. On a single day, over 10,000 requests for help are turned away from domestic violence programs due to lack of resources. The vast majority of homeless women have experienced violence, sexual or physical, prior to becoming homeless. The ERA would ensure the police departments enforce restraining orders against those abusers. There are over 400,000 untested rape kits sitting on shelves in the United States right now. The ERA would compel law enforcement to test evidence in the rape cases. The U.S. is the only nation in the industrialized world that doesn't guarantee paid maternity leave, and the only nation with a rising maternal mortality rate, and the only industrial country without health coverage for all citizens. It provides a fundamental legal remedy against sex discrimination both for women and men. This year, Virginia ratified the ERA to become the 38th and final state needed for ratification. According to the requirements of the Constitution, ERA is the 28th Amendment. The current Department of Justice has told the National Archivist not to certify Virginia's ratification. To get the ERA in the Constitution, we must elect candidates who support equality. The Alliance has put together results of a candidate survey easily accessible at www.era-nc.org. ERA is needed to guarantee our rights from one generation to the next. It is right, it is fair, and it is necessary. Thank you so much for listening, and march on, Asheville.
Many knew her simply as the notorious RBG, but for those of us in the legal profession, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a giant. She was small in stature but large in life, a tremendous talent who worked hard through years of illness to remain on the bench doing justice. From her decision in the Virginia Military Institute case that required that women be admitted, to her blistering dissent in the Voting Rights Act decision, Justice Ginsburg worked hard and dedicated her career to assuring justice and equal opportunity for all. She's going to be missed, and she leaves a legacy that is a true example for others to follow. I remember back in the 90s when I was an instructor at the Air Force JAG School, we used to take our students up to the Supreme Court for a visit. And the clerk of court was a retired Army Major General, Judge Souter. And Judge Souter would give a tour of the court, and many were surprised to learn that the two best friends on the court were Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, who couldn't be more opposite in their judicial outlook, but were close friends off the court. That shows that we can disagree but not be disagreeable. So today we march in memory of Justice Ginsburg, and we march for women who felt marginalized and who looked at her as an inspiration, knowing that she was fighting for them. Justice Ginsburg said that we need to fight and fight hard, but fight in a way that people will follow. So we need to remember her example, what she stood for, in her years of hard work and dedication to the Supreme Court and to this country. Her final wish was that the successor be picked by the next president, and I hope that wish is honored. But today we remember Justice Ginsburg and a life well lived. You served your country well, and may God bless you, and may you rest in peace.
I am proud to have been born and raised in Western North Carolina. Women of the mountains know what's important. Honor family, faith, and friendship. Love is love. Put in a good day's work and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Thank you to Ruth Bader Ginsburg for her dedication to promote and affirm women's rights. And thank you to the women of Western North Carolina for your actions to follow in hers and other suffragist footsteps.
In 2002, in an interview with NPR, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "Dissents speak to a future age. It's not simply to say my colleagues are wrong and I would do it this way, but the greatest dissents do become court opinions, and gradually over time, their views become the dominant view. So that's the dissenters' hope, that they are writing not for today, but for tomorrow." Sisters, how you choose to dissent is up to you. It may include prayer or spirit work, marching or voting, protesting or writing, challenging those closest to you, or educating yourself about the plight of the marginalized. But as individuals committed to a better tomorrow, I charge you to have prophetic imagination and to work every day to make the world you imagine a reality.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg has changed the game for American women. She has fought for equality her entire adult life. Justice Ginsburg was known for speaking out, and she didn't hesitate to vote against the majority when she knew what was right. When RBG first became active in politics, women were treated differently under law. We owe many of our rights today to her. It is our responsibility to carry out her legacy, and it is our responsibility to vote.
Justice Ginsburg was a legal pioneer for gender equality and a fierce ally of civil rights, equality, and justice during her entire career. She was an inspiration to women all across the country for decades, from her time working at the American Civil Liberties Union to her years on the Supreme Court.
As we grieve her loss, we must work to honor and defend her legacy. In her own words, we have the oldest written constitution still in force in the world. And it starts out with 3 words: we, the people. Thank you.